Everyone, and welcome to our Wellness Wednesday session on the topic of developing new positive habits and reducing unhelpful ones. My name is Laura Vardy, and I'm the Regional Mental Health Promotion and Addiction Prevention Consultant with NL Health Services in the Central Zone. So many of us want to or wish that we could do things differently when it comes to coping with many areas of our life and improving our mental health. Maybe we wish we could be more patient when communicating with our family. Maybe we want to go to the gym more often or start going. Maybe we want to learn to speak up more for ourselves. There are many things we may see in our own behaviors and coping patterns that we identify as wanting to change, but we may not know how to make those changes. Or maybe we've tried and it hasn't stuck and we've slipped back into old patterns. And that's actually very common. More often than not, that happens maybe multiple times before our behavior change really sticks for good. And we're going to discuss this in more detail later on as we go through the session. So this session is going to help us look at what behaviors we may want to change, ones that might be getting in the way of having good mental health or our overall quality of life. And it will also help us to look at some strategies to go about making changes in a more effective and sustainable, lasting kind of way. And as we think of the behaviors we want to change, we don't want to look at behaviors so much through the lens of good, bad, right, or wrong, because this can make us feel guilty and feel shame. We want to look at, is this behavior effective for me to live the life that I want to live and be the person I want to be? So for example, you might ask yourself, is eating a bag of chips every evening helping me to live the life that I want to live and be the person I want to be? If the answer is yes, then keep on eating those chips. If the answer is no, then you might want to consider ways that you can change that behavior. So let's take a look at some of these quotes and statements. So when we know better, we do better. In life, we're all learning. Sometimes we have not had the opportunity to learn the most effective way to act in all of life's situations. And this is where our Wellness Wednesday sessions can really help you to learn some of those new skills that can be helpful. I'm doing the best I can, and I can do better. So that "and" is really important, right? Because often we're doing the best we can, but we can still do better. And it really continues with the philosophy of the first statement. We have the opportunity to choose to continue to grow and evolve as a person as we go through life, right? So we keep on doing the best we can do, but we can also have the goal of continuing to improve. No matter how old you are, no matter how much you know, there's always that opportunity to grow and to improve. And when we approach learning and change in this manner, we can reduce or remove the judgments we may have toward ourselves. All behavior is purposeful. So it may be easy to look from the outside and see the destructive nature of some of our behaviors or the behavior of others. But once we see a behavior as ineffective or problematic or even destructive, we may not see any good in it, right? But it is helpful to see the underlying purpose of our behaviors because every behavior has a purpose, even behaviors that maybe we don't like or that are causing us some problems. So it's helpful to ask what need is being met by the behavior. So when it comes to substance use, oftentimes people may be using substances to numb their pain, either physical, emotional, or both. When we can see the underlying need that's being met, then we can seek other ways to meet the need that can be less destructive or more effective for us. And finally, we have a Viktor Frankl quote here. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So that is very true. Sometimes we struggle wanting to change other people, wanting to change a situation, when really that's not possible. It's outside of our control. But what is within our control is our own behaviors. our own responses, our own reactions, so we can change that. And that's what we're going to focus on during this session. So why do we do things that don't work for us? We all do that, right? It's a normal part of being a human. We might do this because certain behaviors because they feel good in the moment. They give us a momentary relief from uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. So this may be where substance use comes in, whether it's alcohol or other drugs. It might be eating sweets or eating some junk food. It might be taking a nap. It might be some other form of distraction, right? It could be watching TV. Now, those things aren't always bad, right? It can be sometimes substance use or treating ourselves with junk food, having a nap, watching TV. We can do some of these things in moderation without them causing us problems in life, but it's when they cause us problems in the long run is when we really want to ask ourselves, okay, is this something that I really want to continue? Sometimes we've learned to cope in certain ways that may not be the most effective because this is what we've learned from our family, from our community, from society, right? I think of that commercial for Kit Kat where it says, have a break, have a Kit Kat. So it's encouraging using that sugary chocolate bar to help you have a break, relax, de-stress. And while having a scattered Kit Kat bar is probably not going to cause you too many problems in your life, it might be more of an issue if it's your go-to coping. If you're overeating, if you have diabetes, for example, right? Sometimes we don't know what else to do. In a situation, we may be feeling very stressed, very emotional, and we're going to try to cope with it the best way that we can, or in the way that we know how to, right? And that goes back to what we've learned. And sometimes we respond to the biological action urge for an emotion. So all of our emotions, often our behaviors come from the survival part of the brain, and all emotions and bodily sensations come with a biologically hardwired action urge. So it's when I feel emotion, it's that initial urge of how we want to react. We feel angry, we want to attack, right? We want to maybe break something or hurt someone or hurt ourselves. We don't necessarily act in these ways. Sometimes we can stop and think about it and choose maybe a more effective way to react. But sometimes we just immediately react, right? Without stopping to think, is this what's the best way to react in this situation? So problems can arise when the action urge is not effective for long-term coping. Another example might be if we're trying to flee from danger, on a regular basis, we're fleeing from what might be a non-threatening situation. This can take us away from activities and experiences that are actually necessary and helpful. So sometimes kids will avoid going to school because they feel very anxious there. And this gets in the way. This causes problems, right? It causes problems at home. It causes problems with getting the grades they need to pass, getting their education, really, and can actually contribute to increasing anxiety rather than resolving the problem. So it's more of a short-term, feels good in the moment, or provides some temporary relief from those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. So we avoid things that make us anxious in the short term, but in the long term, this actually worsens anxiety. So when we look at this diagram here, we can see that our thoughts, our body sensations, and our actions or behaviors, emotions, all of these things are interconnected. Often people seek help because they want to change how they feel. However, there's no direct way to change our emotions. We can't just say, okay, you feel sad, stop it. Stop feeling that way. But instead, we can look at the factors that contribute to our emotional experience. It can be our thoughts. So we can work on changing our thoughts by understanding the thoughts that we have when an emotion arises, or what thoughts might contribute to a certain emotion arising. We can change our bodily sensations. When we recognize where in our body we feel a certain emotion. If we feel anxious and our heart rate increases, our breathing becomes more rapid, we can practice certain skills such as deep breathing to help slow down the heart rate. So getting those body sensations under control and feeling a bit better. This session, we're going to focus on the actions and behaviors aspect, right? So what we do affects how we think and feel. So changing some of our behaviors in order to change our thoughts and change our emotions or our feelings. So for example, if we go for a walk in nature, we'll often have pleasant feelings in our body during and after the walk. We may have a feeling of more clear thinking, having thoughts that are more pleasant or effective, right? Just like if we're having a thought that nobody really cares about us, we can't count on others, this is going to affect us emotionally. It's going to, and we're going to feel maybe heavy in our bodies, low energy, maybe a tightness. And then we're going to engage in the behaviors of maybe avoiding people, isolating, pushing others away. So you can see that the thoughts, actions, behaviors, bodily sensations are all interrelated and are usually caused by a prompting event or a trigger, which is another Wellness Wednesday session that we talk about. So how do we successfully change our unwanted or ineffective behaviors? Well, it is possible, but behavior change can also be hard. So I want you to keep that in mind. And sometimes we may or we may not need some more support in order to implement the steps that we're going to explore. And we're going to provide some options for additional supports at the end of this session. So let's take a brief look at some of these steps to making changes in behavior successfully. So first, we want to be able to identify the behavior or behaviors that are no longer wanted, no longer effective. And consider if there's a way to reframe that change into a behavior you want to start instead of one you want to stop. So it's a bit more positive if we say, I want to stop eating fast food, changing that into, I want what we want to do instead. So I want to eat more nutritious home cooked meals, for example, could be the goal. Prioritize if there's more than one area that you want to change. So it can be very overwhelming if you want to live a healthier lifestyle and you're thinking, well, I need to exercise more, I need to change the way I eat, I need to eat less of this and more of that, and so on and so on. I need to take medication. So maybe focusing on what is the most important change and starting with that one. Maybe it's starting with what would be the easiest change that I can make, one little change that I can make to kind of build some motivation, some of that positive momentum. So it might be cooking one healthy meal this week. So instead of every single day, we might want to start with just, one meal and building up from there. We want to connect behavior change to our values. So check in with yourself and ask, are you ready to make these changes? What is your why? What is your values? Do you value health? Do you value emotional, physical well-being, financial well-being? Or do you want to make this change because somebody told you to do it, that you need to do it? Often we're not effective at making behavior changes when the motivation comes from external sources. So if it's pressure from someone else, trying to please someone else, So we need to find our own reasons, our own internal reasons for wanting to change in order to really make it successful. So it can be a good idea to look at our values. We want to break larger goals of behavior change into smaller steps if possible. So do you need to learn new skills or gain any new knowledge to make the changes? You know, what is a healthy, nutritious meal? Do you need to find some new recipes? Do you need to do some reading on that? Do you need to meet with a dietitian, for example, to learn about what would be nutritious for you and how can you make a nutritious meal? And we want to remember the 3 Ps, which I'll discuss in an upcoming slide, the next slide actually, which is patient, persistence, and practice. So we want to keep these things in mind as we go about making changes in our behavior. And we also want to notice any successes we have, any progress, even small progress in the right direction. We're not aiming for perfection because none of us are perfect, but just some positive changes that show us we're moving in the right direction, and rewarding ourselves with positive feedback, self-talk, you know, like I'm doing really well, I'm really proud of myself. So giving yourself credit for your effort and hard work. Sometimes you might even want to use material rewards. So it might be if I eat a home cooked meal 5 nights this week, then I'm going to invest in buying that Instant Pot. So often it's things that that can help us meet our goals, right? So it's not if I eat 5 healthy meals this week, then I'm going to reward myself with McDonald's. It can be more effective if we choose things that are helping us to continue with the goal that we're making. So a little bit more on the 3 Ps that I just mentioned. So when we are aware that we are engaging in behaviors that are not helpful, we may be very hard on ourselves, right? We may beat ourselves up, be very critical, harsh, and even abusive in our self-talk or the way we talk to ourselves. So this may be, and often this is happening in our heads, and we may not necessarily be aware of that critical voice in our heads, but we know how we feel, how it makes us feel emotionally. So it's very important to pay attention to our thoughts, our self-talk in particular, because it doesn't help us to make changes. It's more likely to keep us stuck. So if I had planned to, say, quit smoking today, and I did all right for a few hours, but then I went out and I smoked a cigarette. If I were to say to myself, oh, you idiot, you messed up, you're such a failure, that is not going to help me quit smoking. That's going to probably help me to smoke more because I'm going to feel so awful about myself and what happened. So it's really important to talk kindly to ourselves, to be patient with ourselves, to say things like, okay, well, you know what? You did really well for most of the day. 1 cigarette is not the end of the world. You know, it's a start. It's a start towards that goal of quitting. And it might even be that you need to revisit your goal. It might be like, okay, well, I can't quit cold turkey or completely. Maybe my goal should be to reduce the number of cigarettes I smoke today. Or maybe I need additional support to help me with my quit goal. Maybe, so that persistence as well, right? That comes along with the patience. Skills cannot be fully developed overnight. Change often does not happen immediately or on day 1. So it's not giving up, being persistent, and continuing to practice the skills that help us. When considering the behaviors we may want to change, let's keep the following in mind. So this is really the first step of identifying behaviors and actions that may be helpful to change. So we want to be careful to choose the behaviors that are getting in the way of you living the life that you want to live. We're not trying to change who we are as a person. So if you're a introverted, shy, quiet person who'd rather stay home and watch a movie or read a book with a loved one, with a friend, rather than going out to a party, then you're not really going to change that preference. You can practice being more extroverted, you can go out more often, but it's not, you're not going to change who you are as a person. Or if you're a hands-on learner, you're not going to suddenly become a book learner. And that's okay, because we all have our different unique personalities, character traits, things that make us who we are. So what we're trying to change is behaviors that are maybe causing us some problems. And we can receive feedback from the people in our lives, but we also want to ensure that their feedback makes sense and is coming from a healthy place. So when people are trying to giving us feedback, saying, well, you messed that up, or you can't do that, or I don't think you're going to be able to do that. When it's kind of similar to that negative self-talk, that criticalness, we don't need that, right? That's going to make us feel worse. So we may want to try to distance ourselves from those people that may be more critical. I know that can be very difficult. Perhaps it's maybe not involving them in your goals and your plans for behavior change if they're not going to support those things and be critical about it. And of course, we want to keep in mind that we're talking about behaviors that we want to change, not ones that other people are pressuring us to change that really we don't want to change. We're not ready to change, perhaps. We want to also consider identifying what is important to us, who we want to be, right? So that can help create motivation for change. And it's more helpful to have a goal that we're moving towards than focusing on what we're trying to stop, as I mentioned already. So when we say, I need to lose 20 pounds, that's not as effective as focusing on the behavior associated with, like, I choose to be healthy, or I want to be at a healthier weight. Right? So what behaviors can help us to be at a healthier weight? It might be, I want to eat more nutritious home cooked meals, certain number of nights a week. It might be, I want to start exercising. And then of course, with goals, we want to make them very specific. So the goal is not going to be just to exercise more. It's going to include all the steps you take to that. What does that mean? Does that mean 15 minutes a day? Does that mean 3 days a week for 30 minutes each day? Does it mean at the gym? Does it mean a walk outside? Are you getting a buddy involved in this? What time of day? Is it morning? Is it evening? So all of those type of things, it's helpful to plan out when we're trying to make behavior changes. And try to avoid thinking things, and we all do this, of course, but trying to kind of be aware and catch ourselves when we think, I have to do this, or, I should do this. Instead, it can be helpful to use phrases such as, I choose to, or I can, right? So a bit more positive ways of looking at change. So when we experience triggers, right? When we experience those things that cause us to have certain thoughts, physical sensations, we can become hooked by them. And when we're hooked, we're not thinking about who we want to be, what's important to us, what kind of life we want to create. We're maybe more so responding on that action urge, that immediate emotion, right? So someone says something to us that maybe makes us feel angry, we lash out, we yell at them. So that's when we're going down the path of the hooked, where we're moving maybe away from our values, because chances are that may not be how you want to react. So for an example, you come home after working the night shift. maybe it's late in the evening and you see that there's a pile of dirty dishes left in the sink by your spouse, your kids, your roommate, whoever it is that you live with. So you're feeling frustrated, right? And it doesn't help that maybe you're tired from working already. It kind of creates some vulnerability to experience more intense emotions. So maybe as soon as you see that person, you kind of lash out with your anger. Maybe you yell at them. This is probably not the most effective way to react. And you might feel regret afterwards as you calm down, right? But you can't take back that action. And we've all been there. We've all had these situations happen in life. But likely you don't value being an angry person. You maybe value having positive, healthy relationships with the people you care about. So that action, that, lashing out at someone really moves you away from those values and the kind of life you want to live. So again, we're not looking at perfection, but we want to try to find ways where we can choose to react in ways that move us towards our values and the life we want to live. We want to be unhooked. So we are now going to watch a little video that really explains that concept of being hooked or unhooked a bit more.
All day long, humans do things. Even if it's just sleeping. Now, some things we do move us towards the sort of life we want. When we're behaving like the sort of person we want to be, doing things that make life richer, fuller, more meaningful, we can call these towards moves. Now, other things we do move us away from the life we want to live. When we're acting ineffectively, behaving unlike the sort of person we want to be, doing things that tend to make life worse in the long term, we can call these away moves. Now, when things are going well, when life is giving us what we want, it's pretty easy for us to choose towards moves, to act effectively, doing stuff that makes life richer and more meaningful. But unfortunately, life just isn't that easy most of the time, and it doesn't give us what we want for very long. So as we go about our day, all sorts of difficult situations and difficult thoughts and feelings will arise. We may experience emotions such as worry, we may catastrophize, predict the worst, we may have thoughts popping up that I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, life sucks, it's all too hard. Now, unfortunately, we easily get hooked by those difficult thoughts and feelings. And almost every psychological problem, from stress and anxiety to depression and addiction, boils down to this basic process. We get hooked by difficult thoughts and feelings, and we do away moves. However, there are times when most of us are able to unhook from these difficult thoughts and feelings and choose towards moves instead. And the better we get at doing this, the better life gets. So that's what this approach is all about. We're going to bring in some helpers to help you get a lot better at choosing towards moves. As a first step, we're going to help you identify your values, who you care about, what matters to you, what sort of person you want to be, and use those values to guide and inspire and motivate you to do more towards moves. And we're also going to develop unhooking skills so you can get a lot better and a lot faster at unhooking yourself from all those difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories. The more we develop our ability to unhook and choose those towards moves that really matter deep in our heart, the greater our quality of life, the greater our health, happiness, and well-being.
Okay, so that video, I think, does a pretty good job of explaining how we can move towards or away from our values. So now I'm going to ask you to think about what are some behaviors or actions you would like to change. Maybe write those down, make note of those. It could be a whole bunch of different ones, and then you can later on maybe narrow it down to the most important one you want to start with. And to give you some ideas of behaviors you might want to change, we can look at this wellness wheel. So the wellness wheel shows various areas of our lives that can contribute to our wellness, of course. And it's important to try to achieve a balance in all different areas. Of course, most of us probably aren't currently experiencing a balance, right? If you look at each area, you might say, well, you know, my physical well-being is really great. You know, I might rate that 8 or a 9 out of 10. But my mental well-being, that could be a bit better. You know, maybe that's a 6 out of 10. Or recreation, I'm not doing a bunch of hobbies, not having a lot of fun and downtime. Maybe that's only like a 5. So when we can kind of rate these different areas, then we get an idea of maybe where we want to start to focus, where we can make some changes. And remember the P, patience, right? So having patience, it's not possible to make all the changes at once. So we want to prioritize maybe one area to focus on and setting realistic goals for ourselves. And again, connecting that behavior change to a value. You know, what's important to you? Is spirituality, that personal growth and understanding important? Or is being able to budget and save money something that you really value and want to focus on? Right? So for example, if I want to create and stick to a budget, this helps me have a sense of peace in my life, as I won't be worrying about, you know, if I can pay my bills or not. So I'm valuing peace when I say no to spending that extra money on eating out at a restaurant or buying that new outfit. And when I feel more peaceful, I'm also a better friend. I'm better able to be present and enjoy day-to-day experiences with my daughter, with my spouse, with the rest of my family and friends, and so on. So that can be one way of looking at this and determining a behavior change. So we also have, of course, we have the physical well-being, which most of us tend to be aware of or focus on at times. I think of a lot of New Year's resolutions, people wanting to eat better, wanting to exercise more. Sleep can also be in there. And those things are very important. Of course, everything in this wellness wheel is important. So we have our mental well-being as well, social well-being, so feeling connected to others, recreation, so it's important to have that time for fun, hobbies, that downtime, finances, so taking care of our finances as best we can to decrease our stress levels, career, if you are someone who works, then how satisfied are you with your work? Is that something that you need to change? Spirituality, sometimes people look at that as practicing a religion. They might say, well, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, but it can be so much more. As you see, it can be related to personal growth and understanding. It can be spending time in nature, it can be journaling, it can be reflecting on our values. All of that can be a part of spirituality. And then we have our home, our environment. So are we in safe and comfortable living space? If we're not, right, if we don't have a home, if we don't, or have a home that is safe, that is comfortable, then that's probably going to be a really high priority one, because it's hard to be physically, mentally well, to engage in our hobbies and those other things, go to work, spend time with others, and have wellness if we don't have that safe and comfortable living space. So let's talk about motivation. Motivation is often considered necessary for behavior change. Um, People might say things like, I just can't get motivated, right? Or I'm not motivated to do that right now. We've all been there. But motivation, it's not as clear as it might seem. It's not either, you have it, you don't have it. Motivation is something that changes over time. And there are ways that we can increase our motivation. I want you to keep in mind that change, again, change can be very hard. It can be scary. It can involve experiencing painful emotions and interactions. It also requires energy, intention, and focus. So sometimes maintaining the status quo or not making changes can feel easier in the moment, right? In the short term. So no wonder it's hard to get motivated or to stay motivated and to make or maintain some behavior changes. However, when we do not effectively address issues or problems in our life, they tend to grow, right? And the consequences can increase, right? So for example, for some of us, it might be easier to always say yes when another person asks us to borrow money. It's easier to say yes. Maybe if we are a people pleaser, we don't want any conflict or we want to help that other person. But maybe it's causing us financial strain, so it could be harming us. So that might be something to consider. So this next short video will talk about motivation and how we can work towards behavior change even when we don't feel motivated to do so. And it's called the happiness trap, and it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
Now, our minds are so clever, they can come up with an almost infinite number of reasons for us not to do the stuff that's really important. And one of the sneakiest reasons our minds will come up with is, I don't feel motivated, or I've got no motivation. So let's have a look at this. Because when you're saying, I'm not motivated, or I don't have the motivation, what do you really mean? What most people mean when they say that is, I don't feel in the mood, I don't have the energy, I don't feel good, I feel too depressed or anxious, I feel tired. When I feel like doing it, then I'll do it. But until I feel like doing it, I'm not going to do it. If that's your idea of motivation, that you need to feel like doing it, feel in the mood, feel good, feel positive, that's going to keep you really stuck in life. That's going to keep you stuck in that comfort zone, waiting until the day that you feel really good and positive and motivated before you step out of the comfort zone. What I'm encouraging you to do in this program is find a different source of motivation. Rather than relying on your feelings, use your values. Let your values be your motivation. I'm going to do what's important in my heart, living my values, because that's what matters to me. That's the sort of person I want to be. That's what I want to stand for in life. Let your values motivate you so that even if you don't feel like doing it, even if you feel really tired or stressed or anxious or miserable, you can still do what matters.
Okay. So I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes we say, I'm not motivated, I'm too tired, I don't have the energy, I'm too busy, and we make up these excuses to not do things. We all do that. It's okay. I think it's part of being human. It's normal. But it also keeps us stuck. It prevents us from making behavior changes and maybe moving towards our values, right? So it can be helpful to look at, what is my value? If I want to live my healthiest life, then why am I here saying, oh, I'm too tired to exercise tonight. I'm too tired to cook supper, for example, right? So if we say, I really, really want to live my healthiest life, that can kind of motivate us or give us a little push to maybe do those things, even if we feel tired. and don't necessarily want to do them in the moment. Not easy, right? Also, change sometimes happens when the pain associated with staying the same is greater than the pain of change. So often we want to do kind of what's easiest in the situation. And sometimes it just becomes too painful or causes too many problems to stay the same. So, for example, maybe someone who struggles with anger, they might say their anger might start causing them problems. They might lose relationships. They might lose their job because of it. Then it becomes a bit easier for the person to say, you know what, I really want to change that. I don't want to be such an angry person. I don't want to be having these problems. I want to change. Or maybe if someone has a heart attack and their doctor says you need to quit smoking. For some people, they might decide, okay, you know what, I'm really motivated. I really want to quit smoking now because I want to live. Not everybody, right? I know someone who had lung cancer and had said, I would rather die than quit smoking. So they didn't quit smoking, despite the problems that it was causing to their health. For them, the benefits or the rewards of smoking may have outweighed the challenges associated with or the problems associated with their smoking. So let's look at this stages of change diagram. This can really help us understand how people do change or don't make changes, how we can get stuck. And so there's 6 stages in this diagram, and we don't necessarily go through all the stages or follow them in a neat order, although I'm going to explain them in a particular order, starting with pre-contemplation. So this is before a person is thinking about changing a behavior. There's no intention to change that behavior. That would be like the person I said who did not want to quit smoking, even after having a diagnosis of lung cancer. They, for whatever reason, whether it was the enjoyment of the smoking or they thought it would be too difficult for them to quit at that point in their lives or whatnot, they were not seeing the smoking as a problem or considering making changes. And it can be very frustrating when we have a loved one who is in the pre-contemplation stage of change with a behavior that maybe we see as problematic or wanting them to change. And this can often be the case with substance use, for example. Contemplation is a place where a lot of us will find ourselves at times where we begin to think about making a behavior change. Maybe we're having more conflict with our family, or we're missing work or school. We're experiencing some problems. We're aware that there is a problem and that it is connected to our behavior, but we haven't made that decision to make a change yet. We're ambivalent. We're kind of weighing the pros and cons. We're maybe thinking, yeah, you know, like I'd like to quit smoking or I'd like to join the gym, but also, you know, it's going to be really hard and require a lot of effort. And I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if it's worth it. So really weighing the pros and cons of making a change versus not making a change can be helpful here to propel someone into either making that decision to change or not, right? Once a person has made a decision to change a behavior, they move into the preparation stage of change. Okay, I want to change. Now I need to prepare for it. And it's good to prepare as much as possible. So we just don't dive into behavior change often. We might need a plan, right? We might need that goal. So if it's, you know, we want to start exercising at the gym, okay, you're joining the gym, but also when are you going to start going? What time are you going to go? What workouts are you going to do? Are you going to go to particular classes on certain days? Are you going to use the treadmill? Are you going to use the pool, the weight room? Do you need a buddy or want a buddy to go with you? Do you need to buy new gym shoes or clothes? So all of this can be part of preparation before you actually set foot into that gym and start exercising. Action, of course, is where you are taking that action. You are making that behavior change. You have started exercising, or you have quit or cut down on smoking, or whatever the change may be. And then we have maintenance, and this is usually after a period of months when the person remains in the action stage. They're continuing to take action. They're maintaining the changes made. They're sustaining that behavior change. New behavior replaces old behavior. And oftentimes, people will not make it to the maintenance stage of change before they kind of go backwards, right, and stop taking action. Or people can be in that maintenance stage and they can still have a relapse or fall back into old patterns of behavior. And that's okay too. The main thing is if we do relapse, so if one were to quit smoking and then they started smoking again, or you stop exercising, instead of that negative self-talk, beating ourselves up, thinking we failed, it's recognizing this is a normal part of behavior change, unfortunately, right? Where it's so difficult. It's very common to kind of relapse or have setbacks, going back into those old patterns of behavior. So it's helpful to remind ourselves of that, and to say it's part of the process, it's part of the stages of change. And okay, now what do I do? Maybe what do I want to do, right? Do I want to, so like contemplating again, do I want to make that change? Do I still want to make that change? Okay, if I do, then preparing for it and taking action again. And each time, another positive way of looking at relapse is you learn, right? We learn what works, what doesn't work. We may need to modify our goals in order to make that behavior change successful. So we want to identify a desired behavior change. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've thought of any behaviors you'd like to change, it's a good idea to write down even one change you would like to make. So narrowing that down to one small goal or step that you can make, one behavior that you could change. And your why, right? Why do I want to do this? Is this something I actually want to do, or am I receiving a lot of pressure from others? Or is it both, perhaps? What is the value that is guiding this new behavior? So it's important, if we want to be successful with long-term behavior change, to tie it to a value, really, right? Am I making this change? Am I quitting smoking because I care about my health? Am I joining the gym because I care about my health? Am I going to start getting some individual counseling for myself because I want to be mentally well, mentally healthy, or I want to improve my relationships with others? And just as an example here, we have, so wanting to learn to communicate my feelings and needs in relationships more clearly. I think that's a pretty common goal for folks to have. So that's, the change the person would like to make. Why? Well, because I want to feel connected to others and have healthier relationships. What is the value? It's authentic connection and emotional intimacy with others. So that can really help us propel us towards behavior change. And writing things down in this format, and I mean, you can find some of these worksheets, decisional balance, they're often called, or you can simply write down your own diagram like this. And this is where you're kind of weighing the pros and cons. So I encourage you to do this if you're kind of maybe in that pre-contemplative or contemplative stage of change where you're not sure, maybe someone has suggested that there's a problem, you might want to change a certain behavior, or maybe you're thinking about changing a behavior, but you haven't really decided whether or not it's worth doing or something that you're ready to do or want to do at this point in time. So this can really help us to make that decision whether or not we want to change a particular behavior. And it can also help us if we decide that we want to make changes. Looking back at this can kind of help keep us motivated and remind us of those reasons why we decided to make that change. So for example, let's look at something different. Maybe someone is thinking, you know what, I'm not really happy with my current career, with my current work. Maybe I should change jobs. So we have the advantages of making a change, or the advantages or benefits of quitting the job. So maybe it's getting away from workplace stress, improved mental health. Maybe it's more time to do the things that I enjoy, perhaps finding a job that I find more satisfying, where I feel better mentally. But then we have the disadvantages of making a change. So even making positive changes, there tend to be some disadvantages or things that maybe we don't like about making the change, right? So maybe this means a period of unemployment, taking a pay cut or loss of income, the uncertainty of finding a job that we prefer, those type of things. And then we also have the disadvantages of not making changes, right? So it moves beyond pros and cons. So, you know, the problems that may occur if I don't make this change, kind of similar to the advantages of making changes, which is above it, right? So if I don't quit my job, then I could experience mental health problems, burnout, relationship problems. I could be fired. And then we have the advantages of not making changes. So what would be an advantage or positive thing about not quitting the job, about staying in that job? Well, maybe I really like the income, the guaranteed income, and I don't have to stress over paying bills. And when you look at what you write in each of these quadrants, it's not all about making the decision to change or not change based on the number of items in each quadrant or each box, but it's kind of about the importance of each item and your values, right? So you might have more reasons to make a change. So maybe there's more reasons to make that change. So looking at the top left quadrant, and the disadvantages of not changing are the bottom left. So in that case, you know, maybe you're more likely to be motivated to make a change, right? But it also depends on what's most important. So if I value my mental health more than anything right now, that might be more important to me than having financial security. Then I might be more likely to quit my job. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people might be in a situation where they stay at jobs where they're quite unhappy and maybe experiencing burnout because financially they can't afford to leave. So it can be quite difficult. But that diagram can certainly be helpful. So how do we change our behavior? Once we've decided that we want to make a behavior change, how do we do that? So here are some strategies that can help us. Prepare, just like that preparation stage of change, right? We know that change isn't easy, so we want to be prepared to increase our chances of success. Do we need to learn new skills? Do we need to gain support from others, right? It can be very helpful if there is at least one supportive person in your life who you can talk to. and let them know about the change that you're making and perhaps how they can support you. It might be, like I said, needing to buy new items like gym clothes, for example, or maybe finding some healthy recipes and going out and buying the ingredients to make those recipes. So there's steps to prepare. We can rehearse just like an actor learning their part. We might want to rehearse what the change will look like before we are actually in the situation where we have to do things differently. And this is where practice can come in, right? So maybe if we want to change the way we communicate with people, we want to communicate more assertively, less passively. So we want to practice maybe saying no in an assertive way to requests that we cannot meet. So if someone is always asking us to borrow money or things like that, and we really want to be able to say no, then we want to practice how we're going to say that. And that's very similar to role play, right? Where you might want to even enlist the support of a family, a friend, a therapist, or even practicing in front of a mirror, where you have that person who's asking you to borrow money, and then you practice exactly how you're going to respond to that person. And that's something that we do a lot in therapy to help people communicate and learn new ways of communicating. We might want to, if it's not possible to actually practice, act out, role play, then we might want to visualize the new behavior. We want to try to use all of our senses and visualize as much detail as possible. Sometimes professional athletes will use this strategy in order to help them prepare for an event. So thinking about someone who's a runner and they're going to be in a very important race, they might want to visualize what it's going to feel like, what it's going to look like on that day of the race, and visualize themselves racing and winning to kind of help prepare them. We want to practice the new behavior, of course, as often as possible and in as many variety of situations as and settings as possible in order to be successful with something. And we also want to reward ourselves. We want to use positive self-talk. We want to reflect on the positive changes we've made or the steps we've made towards change, or even making that decision to change, and acknowledging to ourselves the positive steps that we've made. And even maybe using a tangible material reward, something that's valued, as I mentioned earlier, right? It might be buying ourselves new clothing. If we're exercising, maybe eating healthier, maybe we're losing weight. It might be something that's maybe we want a new tattoo or a manicure. So things that can be self-care, rewarding, make us feel good about ourselves when we've made positive behavior changes. And this can be along the way to meeting our goal, right? So we don't necessarily, sometimes we can lose motivation if we wait to reward ourselves, if we wait until we've met our final end goal. So it might be rewarding ourselves for some positive steps along the way, some shorter term goals, right? So when I think about weight loss, again, it might be, if you have a goal to lose 50 pounds, you probably want to reward yourself and before you reach that 50-pound mark. So with some smaller rewards along the way. So maybe it's, I lost 2 pounds this week. Maybe I lost 5 pounds and I reward myself. So even preparing and planning ahead for how you're going to reward yourself and when. So now we're going to talk about opposite action. This really goes back to the action urge. As I said earlier, with anger, the initial action urge, the way we might initially want to react is to attack, right? To fight back. So the opposite action, of course, is going to be the opposite of the action that we may want to take in the heat of the moment. So it can be helpful to consider what is the opposite of my old behavior, because we want to replace old behaviors with new ones. So just as an example, someone who's maybe stopped drinking alcohol, quit smoking, those type of changes, people often think that's all there is to do, right? You stop. But it's very important in order to prevent relapse or returning to old behaviors is to replace that behavior with something else, maybe something more positive for us, right? So it can be, okay, I've stopped drinking alcohol. So what did alcohol do for me? So it's kind of looking at that why again, right? Was I doing that to numb certain emotions, to cope with sadness, with depression? If that's the case, then we're going to want to find strategies to help us manage our depression or manage that sadness. So things like becoming more physically active, right? So instead of after work going to the bar or having some drinks, it might be going to the gym or going for a walk. So doing a different behavior, something that, and often something that's the opposite of what one was doing, right? So here we have the emotion of sadness, and we may want to numb with alcohol or other substances, or we may also want to withdraw and isolate from other folks. So it's kind of pushing yourself to maybe be active or to go out and be social. It doesn't have to be something big and entirely out of our comfort zone. We can start with small steps, right? Like I said, it could be going for a short walk outside. It could be, sending a text to a buddy and just having that starting up that conversation with them rather than withdrawing or isolating ourselves. So our emotions can really serve as a guide or a tool to helping us know when we may need to engage in new behaviors and do the opposite of how we would typically respond. So we see some other examples there. Another one we have is fear. That can also be anxiety, where we kind of want to run away or we want to avoid the situation that makes us feel that way, right? Because in the short term, it's more comfortable. But again, that is a short-term relief that causes longer-term problems. So instead of running away or avoiding situations, we want to approach those situations. Now, again, you might need some extra support depending on the emotion, the severity of it. Someone with very severe social anxiety is probably not going to just get up and say, okay, I'm going to walk into that, that crowded store tomorrow on my own. They're probably going to want some planning, some support, and maybe building up to that type of situation that would cause some very intense anxiety for the person. So this is where counseling or support from friends, families, peers can really be helpful when it's things that we struggle with on our own. So we also want to break down the task of change. And I've talked about that a little bit already, that, a very big change or a large goal or something that's vague, we're probably not going to be successful with that. It can be quite overwhelming, right? So we want to think of small tasks or steps that we can do to kind of get us started and leading us to some success that we can build on. So for example, maybe we want to be more organized. Well, what exactly does that mean? That can be a bit vague, right? So we might say, well, I need to clean my house. Okay, that can be a very large task and very overwhelming if you're thinking you need to clean your entire house. If that's been something that you've struggled with, being organized and cleaning your house, right? So you might need to break it down to a smaller steps like, okay, my first goal is going to be to clean the kitchen. I'm not going to think about what comes after that right now. I'm just going to focus on cleaning the kitchen. And what does that involve? That might involve cleaning the fridge, right? So breaking it down into smaller and smaller steps, clean the top tray, completed in 4 minutes, for example, right? So whatever it is that we need to do to feel successful, to make those changes, and then that's going to kind of get us going. So we also need to consider, if we want to make a behavior change, do we have all of the skills, tools, and knowledge to make the changes that we desire, right? Do you know how to cope with stress or anger or anxiety in a healthy way, right? Maybe you want to, you don't want to be yelling at people or breaking things when you're angry, but you don't really know what else to do or how to respond in a different way, and that's okay. Or it might be, you want to be able to say no to requests, certain requests from people, but you don't really know how to say no. It's maybe very difficult for you to be assertive in that way, right? Maybe you feel a lot of guilt, or you're worried that the person will be upset with you, and that's very difficult for you. Or do you know how to quit smoking or reduce your substance use, or abstain from substance use? It's not always so easy, right? So sometimes we need to learn new skills, acquire new knowledge. We need to get some support, maybe asking, it could be informal support from family, friends. Sometimes it's attending these Wellness Wednesday sessions, or other virtual provincial sessions and groups to learn some skills, to gain some knowledge. Maybe it's some individual therapy with a counselor. Maybe it's going to our doctor to discuss different strategies or to get some help. So we can ask others who seem to have the skills that we desire. We can use the internet. We want to make sure, though, that we're using reputable resources, and I will share some of those resources at the end of this session. It might be taking a class, right? Whether it's online, in person, again, depending on what it is. It might be reading some self-help materials. It's also important to find ways to set up our environment to support our behavior change. So here I think about the person who maybe wants to eat less junk food, eat more nutritious foods, and if their pantry is stocked with things like chips and chocolate bars, and they don't have any maybe fruit or vegetables or nutritious foods in the house, it's going to be very difficult to make that behavior change, right? So one of the things the person can do is, cleaning out their cupboards, go grocery shopping, stock up on some more nutritious food options and having those there. Even having them, there's all kinds of tips, right? Like if you buy a whole watermelon and just stick it in your fridge, I don't know about you, but I'm not likely to eat that watermelon. It's probably going to go bad before I eat it. So immediately when you come home, cutting it up into pieces that make it a bit easier, right? Or having the fruit bowl on the counter. Or maybe if you really think, I'm going to buy this whole watermelon, it's cheaper, but I'm not going to cut it up, then if you can, spend the extra money if you need to always to buy the pre-cut stuff, right? Or buying the pre-made salad instead of all the different ingredients. Whatever you can do that's going to help. Are there ways to create reminders or prompts to engage in new behavior? So that's what I talked about, like leaving the fruit bowl out, things like that. It could be, setting an alarm on your phone, or there's, for example, there's an app you can download to remind you to drink water. That's probably something a lot of us could benefit from, right? To make us a bit more physically healthy. Right now I'm learning, or I guess I'm refreshing my knowledge of the French language. So I've downloaded Duolingo. It's an app, it's free, and I do not forget to practice my French because it's always popping up on my phone saying things like, are you ready to practice French today? And then there's also motivating things like, encouraging you. I'm looking at my phone right now and it's saying time to practice. Right? So those kind of reminders can be motivating, and especially if something like Duolingo, you can have like a friend streak and different challenges and things like that to keep you motivated to practice on a daily basis. So there's all kinds of different apps and online resources that can certainly help us. Are there things that you can remove from your environment that may make the change more successful? So I already talked about that, right? Getting rid of junk food. Maybe it's, getting rid of cigarettes or alcohol or other substances from your house, or, sometimes people who are maybe trying to manage debt, they'll see a credit counselor or someone at their bank who can help them come up with different strategies. And one thing might be getting rid of credit cards, for example, and only spending cash. Are there tools or objects that can help you? So I've just kind of talked about there's different apps that are out there. A good place to find some apps, if it's related to mental health and substance use, behavior change, can be found on the Bridge the Gap website, which I'm going to mention at the end of this session as well. Maybe it's something physical. Sometimes people might carry around an object. It could be a photograph, maybe a photograph of their child to help remind them of their why they want to maybe live a healthier life, why they're making certain behavior changes. It could be carrying around a rock that says hope, or some positive type of statement that when the person sees that, they feel that kind of reminds them of what they're doing, maybe why they're doing that, the importance of it. Similarly, people have maybe a phrase, a mantra, an image that helps them summarize the behavior change and the reason for that. Sometimes people develop vision boards. Sometimes people write down positive affirmations, even on a Post-it note, and sticking it on your fridge, on your mirror, wherever that you can see that, things that say you got this, or something else that would be positive, affirming, motivating. It can also be helpful to pair new behaviors with other established behavior patterns. So when you're looking at this picture on the screen, I see a person who's watching TV while they're on a treadmill. So I'm thinking that maybe there's a particular show they usually watch, or they regularly watch TV. Maybe walking or running on the treadmill is a new behavior. So maybe they're more likely to engage in that behavior. Maybe it makes it a little easier for them if they do that while they're watching their TV show, right? Or it can also be, you're folding your laundry while you're watching the news. So maybe you regularly watch the news. Can the new behavior be paired with the news? Can it occur at the same time, right? Cleaning dishes while water is boiling. And you want to be cautious about avoiding ineffective multitasking. So sometimes if we multitask, we're maybe not really paying attention to certain things, or we're not really being successful. It can maybe lead to mistakes or errors if we're doing a complicated process. So for example, you're trying out a new recipe for the first time, you probably really need to focus on that and don't want to be distracted by trying to also do some other things. But simple tasks that don't have any safety concerns can be paired together for sure. Reinforcement. So we can increase the likelihood of success and ongoing behavior change with using positive reinforcement or rewards. And I know that I've mentioned this already, so I'll just again bring it up because it can be very helpful. It's not something that has to be expensive or elaborate, like a big expensive vacation or a spa day, although it can be those type of things. It can also be something that is small, you know, a small item from the dollar store, for example, or it can just be, it could be anything really, right? It's whatever you choose as rewarding. It's not what someone else decides, right? It has to be rewarding to you. It has to mean something to you. As I said, we want to recognize our progress. So even a weight loss of 1 or 2 pounds, or cutting down the number of cigarettes we smoke, the amount we drink, can be steps along the way to reaching our bigger or longer term goals, right? Praising ourselves, using that positive self-talk. As I said before, it can be rewarding. And if the reward is something that we buy, if it's something that we can relate to the behavior change. So just another example here, if a person's trying to be more effective in time management, and as a result, they have some more free time, then they can reward themselves by maybe doing something that they really enjoy during that time, maybe a hobby, a recreational thing, spending time with a friend, something like that that's gonna maybe really, that they're really gonna enjoy, and that's gonna kind of motivate the person to continue to work on managing their time more effectively. So again, we want to be compassionate. We don't want to criticize ourselves, put ourselves down, beat ourselves up when we're not perfect. Nobody is perfect. It does not motivate us. Instead, treating ourselves with kindness, compassion, and rewarding ourselves can reinforce or help us continue with a behavior change. Okay, so we're pretty much at the end of the session. Just want to kind of put it all together now. So identifying the behavior you want to change first and foremost, right? And how do you do that? Well, you think about your values. You think about, what do I want to change? Why do I want to change it? Preparing, you know, what are the steps you need to take to start to engage in your new behaviors? We don't just jump into things without a plan, not if we want to be successful. And this doesn't mean procrastinating, putting things off because we don't feel like it, right? Remember the video that basically said, if we wait around until we feel like doing something, we're probably not going to do it. So sometimes we do have to try to push ourselves. Sometimes it means that we need new tools and strategies. We need skills. We need support from others. And I just want to end with the resources that I mentioned earlier. So down the bottom right, I'll reference Bridge the Gap first. This is our Provincial Mental Health and Addictions Knowledge Center. It's a website. You can just Google it. You can go into our province, Newfoundland and Labrador. There's content for youth and for adults. A lot of these programs mentioned on this slide and resources are available through Bridge the Gap. So there's different service listings. There's online short programs that focus on mental health and substance use and wellness. There's a therapist assistance online. There's MindWell or MindWell U, where we can learn to be mindful, to focus, to cope with stress. There are links to other apps that we can download for free that can help improve our wellness. There's also mention of the Strongest Families Institute. So that's a Canadian organization. They provide the adult ICAN anxiety depression program. They also have a lot of programs for families, for children as young as 3 years old, dealing with when families are dealing with behavioral difficulties, sometimes anxiety in children. And so this involves a coach, through telephone usually, and there's one-on-one as well as group support. So I recommend if you're struggling with anxiety, with depression, or if your child is, or if there's behavioral difficulties, checking at the Strongest Families Institute. We also have LifeWise, which is our provincial peer support organization. They have a Facebook page. They also have a website, but the Facebook page, I believe, is more up to date with some of the groups they're offering. So I know they have in-person groups in St. John's, but they also have virtual provincial groups that explore a variety of mental health topics and are led by peer supporters. So individuals who have that lived experience, with mental health, with substance use concerns, and now they're trained to support others. They also have the provincial warm line. So 7 days a week, you can call a toll-free number and you can speak with a trained peer supporter if you're struggling in terms of mental health, substance use, you just want to talk with a supportive person to help you cope with life stressors. And then finally, I'm going to mention Doorways. So our mental health and addiction services within our province provide counseling service. We have the Doorways program in a lot of our locations, at least 1 day a week, if not more, where people can walk in or call in and speak with a counselor pretty much right away. If you walk in, there may be a wait if the counselor or counselors are busy with meeting with other folks. So it can be a good idea to call ahead to your local mental health and addictions office and ask when their Doorways is available. If it's available, do you need to kind of schedule it? Typically it is those same day or next day. It's not scheduling an appointment for a week or two down the road, because it is a service that's designed to provide a counseling support to someone when they need it. So right away, same day, next day kind of thing. And all of these resources are free, and more information can be found on Bridge the Gap. So this brings us to the end of our session. I want to thank you very much for joining me for this Wellness Wednesday session. I hope that the content, or at least some of the content, was helpful in helping you decide, if there's a behavior you want to change, how you might want to go about that process. All right, thank you very much and have a good day.